Welcome back to the second segment of the show. We've had an awful lot of information that we've been talking about in the first segment. For those of you that have missed it, you're going to have to watch the recap of this on YouTube. But for those that have been with us from the first segment, we're going to go straight back into it. And I know some of you have been trying to get through on the phone calls, which I did mention I'm going to turn off in the first segment. We are now opening the phone line. So if there's any comments that you'd like to make on what's been discussed so far, or you have some questions on what Dominic has been speaking about on the welfare reform, please put them through. A quick disclaimer that I must cover with everyone: this is not an advice session. This is NTV exclusive, so we are specifically using this as an informative session, and for just to give you information on what's happening. So we'd like your phone calls to be comments and maybe questions on what's being discussed, but if we can avoid anyone calling up on their personal circumstances, unless you have something really, really, really complex that you wish to talk about, it might be good for us to listen to. So that's what the phone lines will be open for. So please do try to get through while me and Dominic go through the topics that we have here. And please do not be offended if I've got to cut your call short, because you might be going on to something that's very personal to you. Don't forget, there are millions of people affected here, so we're going to try to keep it as generic as possible. I've spoken very fast because I want to cover all of that, but let's now slow it back down and then go back onto the welfare reform. Dominic, thank you very much again for staying with me and picking up on this topic, which is a horrendous topic, to be honest, for me personally to address, but it's so necessary. So we, I mean, just before, in the first segment, you were talking about sort of the pros of welfare reform, but how easily it comes with a negative. We spoke about the housing allowance, benefit cut, some of those, say some of those changes, I mean all of those changes, even the changes of the disability allowance. So, I mean, just to generalise, I mean, what's really in store for people then?
Well, I think, particularly in terms of universal credit, we're not sure yet, because until the full rollout has occurred, we are not actually going to know what the full fallout will be. What we can see already is that there's a lot of fallout. We mentioned about people finding themselves in arrears for the first ever time, so people that had been used to maybe paying a small top-up of their rent and receiving housing benefit actually are now finding themselves in arrears where they can't cope, they can't budget. Yep. And it's things, there's some short-sightedness where perhaps the government could readdress things. So, for example, the local housing allowance, which is the maximum that a council can pay towards somebody's rent now in the private sector, has been frozen for 4 years. But yet rents clearly aren't being frozen, they are rising at a rapid rate. So actually, whereas maybe 3 or 4 years ago somebody could possibly make up the difference between the housing benefit and actually the actual rent being charged to them, that gap has now grown so large that of course they can't meet their obligations.
Dominic, we've just had a call come through, so let me take this call.
Okay.
Okay, so caller on line 1, welcome to NTV Exclusive.
Hello, assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam.
I'm Shafiqul, call from Burnley. First of all, I give my salam to your guest.
Thank you, Brother Shafiqul. Wa alaikum salam.
Yeah, I'd like to say something about the Brexit. Brexit is a Brexit. Why we British people worry about it? Because Britain is our motherland. Doesn't matter if I'm Bengali, Pakistani or Indian. We are British citizenship. This is our Britain is a motherland too, as well. I'd like to say something about the ordinary people. They don't know about this, what's going on in this world. Yeah. About the European Union, United Nations, Arab League, ASEAN and Africa Union, all will be broken because only stay OIC, Organization of Islamic Council, because God messenger in the present in this world, God messenger Jesus Christ. The whole world will be Muslimin. That's why OIC only stay. Whole world come in, OIC member. Follow the Quran Majid. Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam. Thank you, Brother Shafiqul. Very interesting that he's made a point there about Brexit. I think I can probably safely cover this because the one interesting thing about Brexit was that maybe some people were, I mean, there's a lot of part of Brexit where people felt that they were wrongly informed, but the one thing, Brexit should have no bearing on the benefits, because the welfare benefit system is entirely controlled by the UK Parliament, so not by Europe. So first and foremost, Brexit has minimal effect on this, which is why at the beginning I did say we will keep Brexit and Mr. Trump out of this equation. So this is all down to the UK Parliament, with the exception of non-UK citizens, which is a complication we don't need to go into. But thank you, Brother Shafiqul, for your call. Brexit is something that you feel is maybe, and the only reason I allowed you to carry on talking, even though it is not a part of the topic, because what you said, the context of it is very true, because welfare reform, is that playing a part? And I think I'm going to pose the question over to you, Dominic, because he made a point about Brexit possibly breaking communities, and this is a motherland to everyone, but the welfare reform, as you mentioned, it is tearing the hearts out of communities. And so he's got a point to a degree. Would you agree with me on that?
Well, I agree. And I think also, though, part of the Brexit debate, which obviously has happened now and the referendum has happened and we accept the result of that, was that I think there's a myth similar to what we talked about where the government had perhaps spun a line about people fraudulently claiming benefits, and this welfare reform was necessary to actually keep that in check. I think there was a bit of a myth about people coming from other countries, taking the benefit, taking the housing, and actually sort of taking money out of people that had been born and brought up in the country. And I think that's been proven to be wrong time and again. But that was one of the themes that came through in terms of the debate about whether we were in or out. It was about, if you like, people coming into the country and taking rather than actually giving. But I think what we all know is that there are many, many people that have come to the country that work very hard, that actually prop up many services, the NHS, you know, nurses, doctors, etc. So I think it's an important point, because I think they are intertwined, if only in the fact that the myth is that people from abroad can just come here and claim benefits and send that to their home countries.
I'm just going to go on a little tangent, because I always find this really funny. But when I was in college, we played a game where you had to reveal you had to give descriptive words of a job title, and the rest of the class had to guess what it was. And I remember one group turned around and says, right, this particular job title, he's normally or always Asian. And then they went on to all the others, which gave away who it was. It turned out to be a doctor.
Right, okay, stereotyping again.
The stereotype
Absolutely.
was there, but it's so true to what you're saying, because the NHS doctors we're very reliant on doctors from abroad.
Absolutely, and I think that as that's become clear now. That was one of the key themes for people wanting to leave the union, was actually, well, we're gonna save a lot of money, aren't we? Because actually, you know, we'll be protecting our NHS. There'll be the money we save by not committing to Europe will actually go into our NHS. I think there was a very famous figure, probably something like £365 million would go back in. And of course, we all now know that that's not the case. So part of the problem is that actually there's not going to be lots of money swimming around the economy when we come out of Europe to actually support our welfare reform, to support our NHS. So we're going to have to deal with those issues on our own. And often it's more difficult to deal with issues on your own rather than part of the wider group, if you like.
Can we look at benefit cap and the changes to tax credits together? So I mean, I know you touched on it earlier, but I mean, if you can now possibly elaborate further on what really people should be preparing themselves for.
Well, I think the benefit cap, probably amongst all other welfare reform changes, is, I mean, I would describe it as savage in terms of living in London or out of London. Particularly, it will affect people all across the country.
And the difference is only, what, 23,000 within London that they've dropped it to, and 20,000 across the rest of the UK.
Absolutely, and I'm sure if we had some research done in terms of private rented accommodation, for example, there would be a big differential from London to other parts of the UK. So actually, although it will be felt in other areas, actually in London, if we were to think, we discussed a little bit earlier, that perhaps a 2-bedroom privately rented property in Tower Hamlets might well be £1,800 a month. So if you do that over 12 months, straight away you're looking at about £21,000 a year. Now, £21,000 rent, £23,000 benefit cap. It doesn't take a big stretch of the imagination to show that families in that situation are going to be under immense, not only financial strain, I mean, finances is one thing, but actually emotional, mental strain as well, because they will be fearful of being evicted at the point they start receiving letters saying, you know, from their landlords.
We've just got another call, Dominic. We'll take this call. Caller on line 2. Welcome to NTV Exclusive. Hello.
Hello.
Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum salam.
Yes, brother. What's your name and where are you calling from?
আমি কি বাংলা কথা বলতে পারি?
জি বলুকা, বাংলায় বলুকা।
আমার নাম শামীম, আমি বোলেন্ড থেকে বলতেছি।
কোথায় থাকি?
আমার নাম শামীম।
জি শামীম ভাই, আপনি কোথায় থাকি ফোন করছেন?
আমি ওয়ালপেপার যে
আপনি টিভি ভাই এক কাম করুন, আপনি টিভি ফলো করেন না, আপনি আমার লগে ফোনে দি মাতবা। তে জি আপনার প্রশ্ন কি?
মানে আমি ইউরোপ ইউনিয়নের যে চেঞ্জ আসছে,
জি জি আপনার চেঞ্জ আছে বলুকা।
আমি সরাসরি আপনার সাথে কথা বলতেছি। আমি চাচ্ছি যে ইউরোপ ইউনিয়ন থেকে যে আইনটা আসতেছে, ব্রেক্সিট থেকে বের হয়ে যাচ্ছে, পরবর্তীতে যারা আমরা ইউরোপীয় ইউনিয়নের যা নাগরিক এখানে আছে ওদের কি হবে বা কিছু মানে তাদের বেনিফিট উপর এফেক্ট আসবে কিনা, এসব যদি একটু জানাতেন তাহলে ভালো হতো।
ইনশাআল্লাহ ইনশাআল্লাহ। আমি প্রশ্ন একটা ইংরেজিতে বলবো, আপনি শুনবে এখন। থ্যাংক ইউ ভাই, থ্যাংক ইউ শামীম ভাই। Actually, it's an interesting question, and he's an individual that's come across from the European Union. So he's now, well, I'm gathering that he's now permanently settled here in the UK. Must have come over the last few years. So his question is, what changes is he looking at? And I'm hoping I can safely assume that he's over here and he's receiving housing benefit and probably privately renting, waiting for that 3-year period, and then he can look to apply for the social housing be on the housing list. So his question is, what changes should he be preparing for?
Well, I mean, waiting to get on a social housing list may be one thing. Actually then receiving a social property will be something very, very different. I mean, councils, particularly in London, have huge waiting lists, and depending upon that gentleman's particular circumstances, I don't know, he might have family, etc. So he may have more chance. But actually, in terms of pure what we would know as council housing, social housing, I think the days of people actually being just able to wait for 3 years if they've come from abroad and actually then get on the waiting list and actually start applying will be very, very different to receiving a property. And I think actually innovative councils across London and across the country are looking at other ways of fulfilling the needs of its residents. So my council, for example, Barking and Dagenham, we're looking at things like shared ownership. We're looking at sub-market rent levels. So we've got a company that is council owned where we actually are renting, privately renting, but at 65% of market rents, which is massive for many of our residents that actually can't afford full market rent.
I'm just trying to read between the lines of that caller as well, because I'm going to assume that he's come across from the European Union, so he's probably got maybe a job as a cab driver or a 0 hours security guard, and he's probably reliant on tax credits to supplement his living on top of whatever benefits he's getting in living in privately rented accommodation. Are we going to see a change to his circumstance then? Because tax credits is helping him, he's got housing benefit, but he's in privately rented accommodation, which is a lot higher. So a long way to go before he can look at shared ownership and social housing generally.
Absolutely. I mean, if he's claiming those benefits already, he'll have that sort of protection. So new claims from the 1st of April will be affected, or changes in circumstance. So, for example, I don't know if he's got children again, but if he had children now and were to have maybe a 3rd child, then of course his tax credits would be affected, and when he moved across to universal credit, that would also be affected. But I think you mentioned a key phrase there that we didn't actually touch upon at all, because it's not welfare benefits as such, but it has a big implication: 0-hour contracts. So not only low incomes in this part of the world, high unemployment, but actually when people can get jobs, often it's 0-hour contracts. Often those hours don't give them enough hours to actually claim things like tax credits. So that's a big problem in itself, because those changes, when their hours vary from week to week, month to month, will have impact on their housing benefit, will have impact on their universal credit, will have impact on their tax credits. And actually, because there's a lag in the system from certainly local authorities processing changes in hours, that can then lead to overpayments, can then lead to more stressful situations, etc. So 0-hour contracts, again, not good for the majority of people.
We've got to go for a break, Dominic. Time just flies past us, but we're going to keep the phone lines open. I know there's so many questions out there on such an important topic, and it's about your everyday life. So please, don't go away. We're going to go for a quick break, and we'll go straight into the third segment with your phone calls. I'll see you then.